Coming up today, the head of Korea's spy agency rejects allegations the agency used a hacking program to illegally wiretap citizens ahead of the 2012 presidential election. Korea unveils plans to create more than 200,000 jobs for young people by 2017. It will boost youth employment in the public sector and provide tax benefits for companies. Plus, the United States designates North Korea among the countries with the world's worst human trafficking records. Stay tuned for these stories and more. Hello and welcome. It's 6 a.m. on Tuesday, July 28th here in Seoul. I'm Mark Broome and you're tuned in to our early morning edition of Arirang News. Our top story this morning, the head of Korea's spy agency has flatly denied allegations his organization spied on civilians to influence the 2012 presidential election. Lee Byung-ho told the National Assembly's Intelligence Committee on Monday that he would step down if any illegal surveillance had been conducted by the agency. Choi Sun starts us off.
According to a lawmaker outside the closed-door Intelligence Committee meeting, National Intelligence Service Director Lee Byung-ho said that there were no illicit activities concerning the NIS's purchase or operation of a hacking program developed by an Italian firm, and he offered to stake his job on the assertion. The spy agency chief is also reported to have said that the controversial program, the remote control system, is incapable of tapping into the KakaoTalk mobile messaging system, a smartphone application widely used in Korea. The latest allegations against the NIS came after the recent revelation that the spy agency purchased the hacking program. While the agency has admitted to buying the program, it said it was for spying on North Korea, not South Korean civilians. But the apparent suicide of a spy agency employee who was involved in the program has further raised suspicions. Regarding documents deleted by the employee before his death, the NIS said its restoration of the documents shows there was no surveillance of civilians. But with the agency declining to submit original copies of the log file, the opposition party will likely continue to question the credibility of such claims. During a separate meeting of the ICT and Communications Committee, the opposition party zeroed in on the fact that the NIS didn't report the hacking program purchase to Parliament, which is required by law. The ICT minister said that a software program like the one the NIS purchased is not considered a wiretapping device and does not require government permission for its use. With the ruling party accusing the opposition of threatening national security with a political agenda, it's likely that the hacking allegations will continue to be a bone of contention between the rival parties. Choi Sun, Arirang News.
Now, Korea is not a great place to be a college graduate these days, with the youth unemployment rate standing at a 15-year high. As part of measures to reduce the rate, the government has set an ambitious goal, creating more than 200,000 job opportunities for young people, including 88,000 full-time positions. Shin Se-min reports.
Ko Sung-myung is a 26-year-old college senior with no full-time job lined up. And like many of his generation, he's anxious.
I hear that the job market is in critical condition, with thousands unable to find work. All I can do is just continue submitting resumes.
The number of young, jobless Koreans has increased sharply, going up to 410,000 during the January-June period this year, up 100,000 in just the past 2 years. In order to quell the rising youth unemployment rate, Korea's finance ministry and 6 business associations, including the Federation of Korean Industries, have agreed to work together to boost job creation. They aim to create more than 200,000 job opportunities by 2017, 40,000 in the public sector, and the remaining 160,000 at private firms.
The companies that hire more young people will be provided with financial and tax incentives.
With the measures, the government aims to raise the youth employment rate by 1.8 percentage points. But some experts say that might not be an easy task, as the plan isn't a cure-all for the dire youth labor market.
It's not enough. The number of unemployed young people will keep on rising because more students will graduate every year. More promising number of jobs by corporations must be in the works.
Experts also point out that a new set of measures to help highly educated young Koreans cope with unemployment is another necessity, and that the jobs the government creates should be long-term positions. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
The United States has designated North Korea as one of the world's worst countries for human trafficking for the 13th straight year. The U.S. State Department's annual report on trafficking put North Korea in the lowest Tier 3 of its four-step classification of countries. It says the regime maintains political prison camps, sends people overseas for forced labor, and makes no efforts to improve the situation. North Korea is bunched with countries like Iran, Libya, Syria, Russia, Zimbabwe and Thailand in the lowest tier. The report notes how up to 120,000 North Koreans are thought to be in political prison camps, and around 50,000 more work outside North Korea as virtual slave laborers to make money for the state. Now, on the other hand, South Korea was ranked in the highest Tier 1 category, along with countries like the United States, Britain, France and Germany. Ahead of nuclear talks between Seoul, Washington and Tokyo this week, the US has called on North Korea to come back to the negotiating table in light of the recently signed nuke deal between Iran and 6 world powers. Connie Kim reports.
The U.S. is willing to be flexible with North Korea, just as it was with Iran in negotiations on a recent landmark nuclear deal. Sidney Seiler, Washington's special envoy to the six-party denuclearization talks, said the U.S. is open to dialogue with Pyongyang and willing to engage in a wide array of issues. Seiler is currently in Seoul, where he met Monday with his South Korean counterpart Kim Gun and other officials on ways to deal with Pyongyang's nuclear provocations. Seiler also said North Korea must learn from Iran's recently inked deal with the U.S. and other world powers, and that it should take a different approach toward coming out of its diplomatic and economic isolation. The talks between the two envoys come amid speculation that North Korea could launch military provocations to coincide with the anniversary of the founding of its ruling Workers' Party in October. South Korea is the first leg of the American envoy's three-nation trip that will also include stops in China and Japan later this week. Kim and Seiler will meet again on Friday for discussions with their Japanese counterpart Shigeki Takisaki in Tokyo. There, the three are expected to discuss comprehensive ways to bring the regime back to the denuclearization talks. Seiler's trip comes just after Seoul's top nuclear envoy Hwang Jung-guk met with Chinese officials, including his counterpart Woo Da-wei in Beijing last week, where he asked for China's support in dealing with North Korea. The six-party denuclearization talks involving the two Koreas, the U.S., China, Japan and Russia, have been stalled since 2008. Connie Kim, Arirang News.
So, what does the latest Iranian nuclear deal mean for North Korea, and are we seeing signs of instability in Pyongyang? Our Hwang Sang-yi posed these questions and more to Professor Charles Armstrong at Columbia University for his views on the key issues.
Do you think the latest nuclear deal with Iran could provide an opportunity for North Korea to rethink about re-engaging with Washington?
Well, North Korea is the only one of these three left that Obama talked about at the beginning of his administration. He's opened up the door to Cuba. We now have a deal with Iran to halt its nuclear program. And it would be a fantastic opportunity for President Obama to leave as his legacy an improved relationship with North Korea. North Korea is far more advanced than Iran was, and it has stated repeatedly that it does not wish to and will not negotiate away its nuclear weapons. Now, that doesn't mean that the denuclearization of North Korea is impossible, but it will take a different kind of negotiation than has been done between Washington and Pyongyang in the past.
What crucial steps should both Washington and Pyongyang take?
One could imagine a deal in which both sides agree on the ultimate denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula as a long-term goal. But in the meantime, as negotiations are underway, that North Korea would freeze its nuclear program. I think we have to start with that point now. It's too late to go back to the older position of simply telling North Korea it has to give up its nuclear program right away. That's not going to happen.
There are reports of mid-ranking North Korean officials defecting because of Kim Jong-un's so-called fear politique. Is this a sign of instability?
It reminds me of his grandfather's purges in the late 1950s, which also terrified many of the people surrounding Kim Il-sung, and a lot of those went into exile to China, to Russia, and so on. But this did not lead in the 1950s, as we know, to the collapse of the regime. So this, in fact, can be Kim Jong-un's way of consolidating his power, but it also has negative potential outcomes as well, so we'll have to see where this goes.
President Park Geun-hye has been pushing for the so-called trust-building process with North Korea. Do you think that maybe there's a need for a new approach?
I think that at this point, bold steps are necessary. I think we've been waiting a long time for a breakthrough. This hasn't happened. And perhaps it's time to do something more dramatic, to really reach out in a very significant way, and to have a summit meeting, to have a very high-level set of talks, and to really get the diplomacy between Pyongyang and Seoul back on track. It's been a very slow and difficult time for the last 5 years on the Korean Peninsula, so I think that perhaps a new approach is necessary. And hopefully the 70th anniversary of liberation will be that opportunity.
Thank you, Professor, for your time today.
Thank you.
Now, Japan's upper house of parliament has begun deliberations on a set of controversial national security bills that, if enacted, will allow the Japanese military to expand its role overseas. Speaking at a plenary session on Monday, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said the new legislation was indispensable for fulfilling the government's responsibility to assume every kind of situation and to be prepared for any provocations. He rejected criticism that exercising the right to collective self-defense runs counter to Japan's post-war pacifist constitution, saying the legal stability of Article 9 will be guaranteed. Now, that article renounces war and prohibits Japan from maintaining the war potential. Meanwhile, Abe's security advisor has come under fire from opposition parties for playing down the consistency of the bills with the Constitution. During a speech on Sunday, the advisor said the legal stability of the bills doesn't matter and that what should be considered is whether the bills are necessary for the defense of the country. Japan's Mitsubishi Materials recently formally apologized to American POWs for forcing them to labor during World War II and is set to provide compensation to its slave laborers from China as well. But the firm says the situation is not the same for Koreans who went through similar ordeals. For more on how Mitsubishi is justifying this move, our Kim Ji-yeon reports.
An outside director of Japan-based Mitsubishi Materials Corporation drew the line when it came to extending an apology to Korean laborers. In an editorial to the Sankei Shimbun Monday, Yukio Okamoto said the legal situation of Koreans is different from that of other prisoners of war, such as the U.S., Britain, and Australia. Okamoto argued Koreans were technically Japanese citizens and were treated the same as all Japanese workers during the period.
This is in stark contrast to the corporation's apology to surviving World War II prisoners of war and family members in the U.S. last week, as well as its stance regarding Chinese laborers. In the same Sankei article, Komodo said the company views Chinese laborers in the same light as American forced laborers. He did add that it would take longer to resolve issues with the Chinese, as descendants are suing for financial reparations, a reference to the company's settlement announced last week to pay $16,000 per person in compensation to 3,765 victims of forced labor in China. Korean civic groups say the private corporation needs to discard its double standard on wartime atrocities and requested that a similar apology be made. Korea's Gwangju High District Court ordered Mitsubishi Heavy Industries Limited in June to pay 5 Koreans a total of $482,000, which the company appealed. It's estimated nearly 6,500 Koreans were forced to work for Mitsubishi-owned companies since the country was colonized by Japan in 1910. Kim Jeon, Arirang News.
European stock markets suffered a miserable start to the week following a sharp slump in Chinese markets. The Euro Stoxx 50 fell 2.4% on Monday, while Germany's DAX dropped 2.6%. France's CAC 40 lost 2.6% and Britain's FTSE 100 declined 1.1%. The latest drop comes as China's Shanghai Composite Index tumbled 8.5% on the same day, its biggest one-day drop in 8 years. There is significant concern the slump in China will stifle global markets for some time to come. Well, that's all we have for now. I'm Mark Broome. Have a wonderful day, and thank you as always for tuning in, and we do hope to see you at the same time tomorrow. Until then, goodbye.